Hello, everybody! I am here today with Emma, and we are going to be reviewing Why Women Deserve Less by Myron Gaines, host of the Fresh and Fit podcast, which is not about healthy eating and working out, which is what the title would make it sound like, but it is about taking the red pill and why
Why Women Suck, a podcast.
and how feminism is destroying society. Yes, all of that.
Inviting stereotypically attractive young women on to talk over them and tell them that they're wrong about everything. The podcast. The title does make me think of VeggieTales every time.
It does.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
I'm curious who Fresh and Fit's audience is, because even people I've talked to who are like, I've talked to someone who is a Redpiller, and I've also talked to someone who's a fan of Andrew Tate, and both of them were like, no, the Fresh and Fit guys are assholes. So I'm like, even they don't like who likes them?
I don't know. Maybe they have a 50-50 hate-love audience. Maybe they get a lot of hate views. I don't know.
That's possible. I mean, hate views still give you the ad revenue, so...
Yeah.
If so, that make money, live the hustle. That's be a boss bro. Good job, Myron.
That does make me think. I was having a debate, as often is the case when we read these kind of books. I was having the internal debate throughout over whether Myron Gaines is like a grifter or if he like really believes everything he's put in. And I am now convinced, mostly because of the end of the book, that it's got to be a grift.
Oh, it's 100%. Yes.
If it's not a grift, man's delusional beyond what is believable. So I think this is a money thing, which a lot of like red pill dating advice kind of stuff for men is. I think it's like 90% grift in that kind of sphere.
Well, what solidified this for me as a grift is, like, you reading through this book, and it's just all of this stuff that's like, here's why women don't work as hard as men, here's why men are responsible for more things in society, here's why women are all just a bunch of hoes, and it goes on like that. And then I'm like, okay, what are people actually supposed to take away from this, though? Like, are you supposed to be, like, a very angry man about how unjust the world is? No, when it actually gets to the advice he gives you is... reasonable. It's like, okay, so if you're a young man and you're frustrated and you don't have a girlfriend, what you might be tempted to do is spend lots of money trying to make yourself look rich and successful or get a nice apartment and go into debt. Instead, what you should do is go to college and get an education and start learning a trade and get involved in a job and spend some time at the gym. And I'm just like, okay, so this is just basic self-improvement advice. And it's like,
yeah,
learn how to improve yourself and find what you're passionate about. Don't do it for your girlfriend, or like, don't do it for someone else. I'm like, yeah, I agree.
Like provocative sort of like, women have ruined this and that for you and these things aren't your fault, sprinkled with basic common sense advice. Like in this book, it's like, don't spend 500k on a car to impress girls. It's like, yeah, obviously.
I think that's what solidified it for me as a grift, because I'm like, when it comes down to it, this advice that he's giving is completely irrelevant of all of this other, like, feminist conspiracy theory stuff. Like, it's completely irrelevant when it comes down to it. He, like, tries really hard, and when we get into the, line by line of the book itself, we can look at how he tries to force these transitions in here of, like, so therefore, because women don't deserve anything, women deserve less, and that's why you should, find what you're passionate about, start a career that you like, and work on bettering yourself instead of caring about other people's opinion of you. And I'm like, well, you didn't need all the hating on feminists to make that point.
Could have been a pamphlet. I noticed when we were when I was reading it and I was thinking about who the audience was, and I was thinking, well, it's clearly for it's definitely for men. It's definitely not targeted at women at all. And then within that, it's definitely the red pill audience. I think it's even narrower than that. I think it's just for people who are already fans of Myron Gaines, because throughout the book he writes things like, if you're reading this book, you already know, and like, you guys know I love statistics, all this stuff that is like, he writes as if the reader already knows him. So I think it's just for people who already know and agree with him.
And he'll also do things that'll be like, women are likely to do this thing. Do you not believe me about this? And he provides no source, but is instead like, watch my podcast episode where I talk to this woman and she acts really stupid. And it's like, okay, so I'm reading your book right now. You can't give me the information in your book. You have to be like, anyway, go watch this other stuff that I did where I promise you this, I'll prove it true there. Like, no, you won't.
So there's this sources and links section at the back, which I thought was, I got the vibe of like when you're a university student and you're trying to pad out your bibliography. Research citations and resources. And there are 33 of them. There's like stats from dating apps, which I always think is a huge mistake because it's not real life. And he says in the book that's not real life, but he still uses those statistics. I wanted to talk to you as well because you are an editor as well. So you know book editing. This book was apparently edited by Aaron Clary. I might be getting his name wrong. I think it's Aaron Clary, whose website is assholeconsulting.com.
That was a great American accent you did right there. Very good job.
Thank you. I've been practicing. But like I went on the website and it is fucking funny. All
right, I'm going to it right now.
So he offers financial advice and dating advice. So either he's like very skilled and learned or he's like winging it on the internet. And his whole thing is like, I'm an asshole, so I'm going to give it to you straight. Yeah, this is him. Consulting. He's just like...
Assholeconsulting.com. I'll bring out my full Midwest when I say this. Assholeconsulting.com.
Oh, it's so funny. So I have no idea what his expertise is as an editor. Like, I didn't know, as a layman, I didn't notice any big problems in the book, but I just thought that was interesting that was... Because he's not got... I don't know. He apparently has a lot of skills according to his website, but mostly he tells people what to do with their money and their relationships by being an asshole. And
I'll give him points for the branding. Like, it's catchy branding. It gets your attention. He's definitely got that, but it's also unclear from his homepage what his job is or what service he actually provides. He's like, when you're sick and tired of paying people $400 an hour to spare your feelings and make you feel good, and you finally decide you want to start solving your problem, like, what kind of problems? Because if I'm thinking $400 an hour, that's what you'd pay, like, a lawyer. Like, are you a lawyer? Or are you talking about, like, a therapist? Like, do you have any certifications in anything? Like, what is this?
If he's offering financial consultation, surely like he has to be sufficiently qualified, or that would be at least in the UK, I think that would be a legal issue. But this is the guy who edited Myron Gaines's book.
This checks out. I mean, he seems to be a coherent enough writer. He has a grasp of the English language. Like, I'll say his editing work isn't that bad when it comes to that kind of stuff. But he doesn't seem like a very trustworthy guy by any means. Dude, this dude is like a whole, like, business guru, boss bro rabbit hole on his own. I didn't even realize.
Yeah. Asshole Consulting is its own thing. We should, like, crowdfund a consultation with him and see what...
Oh my god, we should! How much does it cost? Well, it's a one-on-one consultation. $300 per hour. I do charge $300 per hour with a $300 minimum because my time is incredibly fucking valuable. I do not have time to be your emotional tampon.
Oh, that phrase is in the book as well.
I mean, he is an asshole. He says so himself on his own website, so he's not lying to us about that. But I've got to say, his writing is catchy, and that's why he probably was the right choice for the editor for this specific book.
Yeah,
to choose someone who's got a good style of writing, but is also just as much of a dick as you are. Like, yeah, I think he chose the right editor. I'll give him that.
Way.
Copyright 2023 default copyright text.
Copyright. Smart writing style and thematically appropriate style. Adjacent, then, I think the title of this book is pretty good. I think it's
based on a meme. So I'm guessing because people use this as like a reaction to things, he figured I'll title my book after it. So, I mean, again, in terms of the marketing of it, in terms of like reaching your audience, catchy title. Yes.
It's catchy. There's a little bit, I mean, we'll get into this when it comes up in the book, but there's a little bit of a sort of play, like kind of playful thing he's done with the title where it doesn't quite mean what you think it means, which I was kind of expecting. So that's kind of, and it's exactly the kind of thing that would get the attention of people like you and me to read it and review it. So I think it's a successful title at the very least.
We should write a book called Why Women Deserve Less, but it would be like Why Women Deserve Less hate in society, why women deserve
Yeah.
less
such a great idea.
violence, why women deserve less things like that. That way we can just make some quick money off of it too.
So the book opens with a shout out to other Red Pill content creators, including Andrew and Tristan Tate, who, since I started reading the book, have been charged with human trafficking, forming an organized crime group to sexually exploit women, and so on. Now, I'm not trying to do like a guilt by association thing, but because Andrew Tate's online content is and his crimes are like so intertwined, like his romantic advice from his website reflects human trafficking. I think it's important to note that this book a few times congratulates his work. I think the context is kind of important there. Not saying that by liking Andrew Tate, Myron Gaines is an evil person or condones his crimes or whatever, but because the crimes relate to this red pill dating game kind of stuff, I think it's important to point out.
Yeah, and I think I did make note a few times throughout the book when he congratulates Andrew Tate on certain things, because those are things, like, a lot of the work that Andrew Tate did that he's congratulating him on is, like, outright scams. A lot of it is, like, outright, like, working within industries that Myron specifically says he dislikes. It's very contradictory when it comes down to it, which is, again, a reason I think it's a grift, because he's like, oh, Andrew Tate's a big name right now. It doesn't matter if we actually share any goals within what we think is ethical business or what we think is an actually productive way to make money. It doesn't matter because Andrew Tate is also on the side of red pill stuff, so I might as well
He's
just...
in the red pill sphere, yeah.
Yeah,
that's
exactly. I think it's funny that he shouts out Rollo. We all know Rollo. He's the head red pillar, the king of the red pill movement.
He has a lot of opinions about how women look.
But what's funny is, because, I talked to Rollo on a podcast once 2 years ago, which was probably a mistake, but he and his co-host were talking about how they think that Fresh and Fit is stupid. Like, they were talking about that like, when we were talking, like, I was talking to them out loud, and they were like, yeah, we're definitely more logical than the Fresh and Fit guys. They're not really in good faith. They're just here to try to make women look bad just for the joke. Like, we actually care about our research. Like, they were talking about that, and I was like, wait, but now you guys are friends in this book? Okay. Yeah. I'm kind of curious about all the inner workings of the red pill drama. Like, I want to watch it like a reality show. Like, who hates who in the red pill community?
I mean, you basically already said this, but this is why I think so many of them are grifters and stuff, because they all say the same things. They're all like, no, Myron Gaines in this keeps going on about how he loves statistics. Let me get into later how he uses statistics so badly or just doesn't understand them. They all say, I'm the logical one, I use research and facts and whatever, and we don't like this guy and that guy, but then they support everybody in the sphere the exact same and all promote each other the same. It's just, I just think it's a big fucking money thing.
Let's go to chapter 1.
It's going to be a very quick chapter rundown because Myron didn't fucking write it.
So this is the entirety of chapter 1. It's this. That's the whole chapter 1 right there, which is fine. Your chapters don't have to be long. There's no law that your chapters have to be long. What is interesting is that he didn't write this chapter at all. And it's not like he had a guest writer or a collaborator write it with him. He literally just took a quote from somebody else's book and copy and pasted it into this book as his first chapter. It starts with, this excerpt was taken from the book Game, How to Meet, Attract, and Date Attractive Women. It perfectly sums up what men are experiencing in the modern dating market. And that's all he wrote in chapter 1. The rest is just a quote from that book, which is really long.
Like, why are we reading this book then? Why aren't we reading that book instead?
And what's wild is, like, this is the chapter where I had to flip to the back to be like, does he have a citations page? And he does, but nothing is cited in this chapter. Like, he'll say things like, this is the quote from the other author's book. Beautiful girls in big cities are now directly or indirectly offered sex more than 1,000 times a month from men on the internet, at bars, on the streets, and within their social circles. And I was like, I don't think that's true. I don't think I've ever been offered sex 1,000 times a month.
1,000 times a month?
1,000 times a month? What? Maybe I'm just not an attractive woman. Maybe I'm an ugly bitch.
Yeah.
And I've lived in a big city. I've lived in Chicago. Chicago's
I
one of the
live in, like,
biggest.
yeah, I've lived in
You live in
London for
London.
years, like-
We both live in big. Maybe we're not beautiful girls. Maybe we're ugly. I don't know. But we are women living in big cities, and I'm like, okay, I need a source for this. I need to know how this was calculated. Like, what are you considering offering sex? Like, are you drawing like a big conclusion where it's like, oh, this woman was talked to by a man, so deep down he was offering her sex, or is it like something weird like that? Like, so I'm like, where is the source? And then the rest of the chapter, which is the quote from that book, relies on you believing that women are offered sex 1,000 times a month, when that was never proven to begin with. And I'm like, do you have any source for this? But he continues in being like, can you imagine if you as a man were offered sex 1,000 times a month? You would think that you're the best at everything. You would think all these things, blah, 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 blah. Haven't I just described the modern woman? And it's like, well, that all relies on it being true that they are offered sex 1,000 times a month, which you never proved to me in the first place. And I know a lot of really hot women. I don't know anyone who's ever been offered sex 1,000 times a month.
But this is just like absolutely staple classic red pill stuff. The further into it is like women will have 200 sexual partners a year, or they cite these crazy numbers, and whenever real women like look at them and share them, they're like, this isn't possible. No human being could do this. Despite being like quoted from another book, that sets up exactly how Myron he'll just sort of say something and you have to take it for granted that it's true because the rest of the chapter is relying on that.
Well, like, I remember when I was in college, I used OkCupid for a little bit, because in the early 2010s, before Tinder started, OkCupid was the main place people went.
Yeah.
And there was a common question on there where you'd answer it to see if you matched the answer. It would be like, if you found out your new partner had more than 14 sexual partners in the past, what would you think? And the answers were like, that's fine, I don't care. Or it would be like, that's a lot, but I could learn to live with it. Or it'd be like, no, that's way too many. And it had like 14 as the number, which in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that's not like excessive, but it's a decent amount. And now people are trying to say like, oh yeah, all women have sex with 1,000 different men. Like, no, they don't. You made this the fuck up. There is no source.
Women have lives, they have college and jobs and things. There's no time.
Well, according to this book, no, they don't, because the women want to go to college, but they don't actually work hard. They go into stupid fields like gender studies, which is what this book is. Like, Myron, you are a professional gender studies.
This is I was talking to Matt, and he said basically exactly the same thing. He was like, so much of this, I mean, red pill stuff is gender ideology.
It is. This is just gender studies on the other side.
These guys that complain about gender ideology or like, turfy GC stuff talk about gender ideology as this bad thing. It's like that's what you do. That's what this is. This book is gender studies. That's what this is.
If you don't care about gender studies, then why aren't you you're like, men are out here, we'll get into that in the later chapters, but he's like, men are out here working construction and going into the coal mines and fixing the cars, and women are out here doing gender studies. And it's like, Myron, you have never worked in the coal mine. I doubt you could fix a car. I wouldn't trust you to build something for me and have it be stable. All you know is gender studies. That's all you know. All you know is gender studies with poor sourcing. That's all. Yeah. Like, what?
Your job, your daily job is gender studies. That's what Fresh and Fit is. That's what you do.
I love chapter 2 because it is entirely made up. Chapter 2 is fiction. He makes up a story about, it's called Tom, Dick, and Harry. He describes 3 men. The first man is Tom, who's a teenager who asks out a girl and she says no and makes fun of him, and then he feels very bad about himself. And then Dick is a guy who goes to the bar and meets this woman who wants to go on a date with him, but then she stands him up. And then Harry is an elderly divorced man whose wife took all of his money or whatever. And he goes through, and I was ready for him at any point to be like, this is what happens to men all the time. Tom is actually Tom, whatever his last name is, and we interviewed him here. I was ready for him to reveal that these people were real, but he never does because they're not. He literally just made up 3 people and made up a story about how women fucked over their lives. And I'm like, if you have all these stories about this, why can't you give a real example? Like, why can't you tell me a story of a real man instead you just made up these guys?
And the way they make them up, the way he makes them up is so funny. Like, they're all vaguely realistic in their sort of overall thing, like kids being bullies is like, yeah, and I just want to be like, yeah, that happens to girls too. It definitely happened to me. I was like, when I was in school, I was the subject of like a would you rather, as like between me and the other worst girl, you know, like boys did that shit too.
That's so mean.
But I know. So I'm over it.
Unless you two were both the best girls and you just didn't know it. And it was just a difficult decision because you were both the best.
It wasn't. It's okay.
It would be if I were doing it. I'm choosing to believe that. I don't know the other girl, though. Maybe she sucks. I don't know.
We were friends, so it was fine. But no, so it's like there's all these unnecessary details. So like the guy who gets ghosted for a date is also working 2 jobs to save for his retirement. And then the older guy, I love this quote. He's living with his 3rd wife, who, and I quote, nags him constantly and refuses to die or divorce him as she depends on him for her care.
She refuses to die. Fuck this bitch who is hanging on to life. What's funny too is these are made up stories, but he's so extremely specific in how he makes these up. It's talking about like the guy who gets the girl doesn't show up to his date, and it's like on the night of, he texted Jane, letting her know he was on his way. She curiously did not text him back, thinking nothing of it. His Uber arrived at Jane's apartment building, where he texted her again to find out which apartment number to buzz. She did not respond. He checked the time. It was 4:55 p.m., right on schedule. He wondered if Jane was hurt and unable to return his text. Soon it was 5:10, and he was starting to get cold. He looked for a coffee shop or any public place, but none were open. And he keeps going on. It's like 4:55, and then it's 5:10, and then it's 5:45. It's like these very specific times. Just this extremely detailed story about a person that doesn't exist, that he made up.
Completely fictionalized. It's so bizarre. It's really weird. And like this is chapter 2, right? So you're reading this. We've had a chapter that he didn't write, and now we've got the stories of 3 very over the top made up men being like complete heroes and women being completely evil. Like, if you were looking for something that is sort of based in logic and facts and statistics, at this point you would put the book away, right? You're returning this to the library now.
The first 2 full chapters, it's like, okay, if that's what I was thinking. I'm like, okay, let's say I am a young man in his 20s who's feeling lost, is not having a good luck with women, isn't having good luck in my life. All right, maybe I do need to learn about why I'm dating all wrong. Okay, chapter 1, I've learned nothing because you just quoted someone else's book, and how do I know any of this is true? Chapter 2, you made up 3 people. And I'm just like, I don't know if this book's gonna help me. Maybe I'll go read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life instead. At the very least, that book has, like, actual sources in it. Like,
this is just more and more reasons why I was like, yeah, this is definitely only for people who are already fans of Myron Gaines. There's no, like, there's no way that, even if you are, like, a red pill dude, if you don't already agree with this guy and know him, there's no way you can make it through this whole book thinking that it's gonna be legit, because it's insane. This chapter starts to get into how interactions between men and women have dramatically changed in recent history. And I was kind of reading this like, oh, are they going to talk about technology, how like online dating has sort of changed? And they touch a little bit on that.
A little bit, yeah.
But no, it's more like women have the right to vote and stuff and work and stuff now, and that has ruined everything for men, basically.
I like how this chapter starts. It's interesting because it's like, this book will concede one thing to women, which is that it's okay if they don't want children. And it's weird. He brings that up multiple times. He doesn't, like, I would assume that this book would naturally say that, like, women have to have children because that's your job, is to birth babies and carry on the next generation. But he seems open to the idea of not wanting children, and it's totally fine if you don't have children. Maybe he just doesn't have children. Yeah, maybe.
Doesn't want, because it comes up enough and is like sort of out of place enough that I noticed the exact same thing. Yeah, it's weird. But I enjoyed this part. It tells the reader in this bit, if they don't figure out now in all capitals, how things have changed, you could very well end up like these 3 fictional men living in these awful made-up scenarios. It's literally scaring men into listening with made-up stories.
Yeah, I think that people forget that fear is an emotion and that facts don't care about your feelings. And so if you want to pander to someone based on fear... What I think is funny, too, is, like, the fact that he acknowledges not wanting children so much proves also that his old contract, his, like, old way of things being done is also historically inaccurate. Because he says here, like, The old way of doing things was men provided resources and protection, women provided sex and, if wanted, children. It's like, no. If you're talking about like pre-industrial revolution, like times when gender roles existed because you needed men's greater size to physically do certain tasks, there was no if wanted children. There was no birth control pills. There was no IUDs. You were having children. You just were. And a lot of those children were going to die of dysentery or cholera or something too. Like,
Yeah.
this is, you're completely, like, it's this weird thing where there's this, like, desire to romanticize the past. And in reality, like, not only does this version of the past sound worse to me, it also didn't happen.
Yeah, there's this sort of fantasism I notice in like specifically like US conservative circles of like an American 1950s that didn't really exist. Basically, the propaganda posters have like sold over a modern audience into this magical idea of the 50s that wasn't really what it was like for people then. So we're delving into the history of relationships.
Yeah, he keeps talking about the old contract. I think he does basically say all women are inherently prostitutes, because in his mind, the old contract is that women are there to provide sex and men are there to provide resources. So all relationships are men paying women for sex, and that's how it's always been and how it always should be. He does have a sources page, but cites nothing in this chapter. He brings up all these things where he's saying this is how it used to be. No sources, no history lesson, just trust me, bro. So he's talking about the old contract, and I was like, okay, when was this old contract in effect? Can you give me a range of years that I should be looking at as a time period to emulate, or am I just supposed to trust you that this was how it was in some ambiguous time in the past? And then he goes on and saying, like, the biological realities reflected in the old contract, and no matter how much women wish otherwise, they are inescapable. Times have changed. Feminism has burned the old contract. However, political fads cannot undo 200,000 years of evolutionary hardwiring that all men and women have. To deny the old contract is to ignorantly deny human nature. And I'm like, okay, well, if you have some knowledge of human evolution, if you have some knowledge of how humans developed certain traits to be certain ways, and human nature is now solidified in a certain way, wouldn't you elaborate on that? Wouldn't you tell me what traits those are, how those evolved, why this is part of human nature, what the scientific backing behind this even is? Otherwise, why am I reading a book? I'm supposed to just take your word for it? Like, I'm totally open to why I deserve less if you can prove it to me.
It's just straight up sort of old school misogyny as sort of an introductory thing. It's like, women are literally just there to provide men with sex. And then some stereotypes that all men want in a relationship is sex. There's no, they do mention love later. And that's interesting when we get there, but like it kind of made me think, like, whenever I touch like red pill topics, the fans always ridicule me for believing that love is a thing that exists, and I'm like, it just makes me sad to read this kind of book, because like in a normal happy adult relationship, like enjoying each other's company and caring about each other is kind of an important part of it, and this book is like, it doesn't even acknowledge that like somebody being kind or funny might be part of it. It's not at all. It's transactional. It's men provide resources, women provide sex, and it's like, that's so sad.
None of this contract works when you take into account that same-sex relationships exist. However, most red pillars are not like inherently homophobic. Like, if you show them like a gay couple or two lesbians or something, they'll be like, yeah, that's fine. But it's like, they also don't fit into your worldview, though. But this book even references, like, here's proof that men want sex more, because according to this survey, this many male couples have sex this many times, and two female couple, like, and I'm like, so you do acknowledge that same-gender relationships exist, even though that doesn't fit into your worldview of, like, women should be seeking men for resources and men seek women for sex. That doesn't, if two women are in a relationship, they're seeking each other for what? Love? The love doesn't exist. Like, I don't know what. It just completely doesn't make any sense.
In my notes I wrote, if the old contract was true, we wouldn't have relationships because men would just buy sex toys and adopt children. Like, why do we even have relationships in the modern age if that's all that men really want? Like,
right?
Maybe they actually want companionship as well. Can you imagine?
Some people reject the new contract and insist on adhering to tradition. Examples include women who wish to be stay-at-home moms, religious people, etc. And I'm like, okay, first of all, women who wish to be stay-at-home moms, that doesn't mean they're going with the old contract. That could be like a financial decision based on how much the couple is earning and how much childcare costs. And like, there's so many factors that go into that. And there's so many women I know who were stay-at-home moms due to circumstance for a time and then go back to work, or like various things like that. So it's like, you don't know that those people are even adhering to your contract. And then on top of that, religious people, it's like, okay, which religions? Because there's so many different religions in the world. Just religious people as a concept, just not the atheists, I guess. They're different. But like religion can mean so many things, from like, you know, being part of an organized mega church to like just doing spiritual practices on your own. Like, so what does that mean? Again, he's just all over the place. Nothing's cited.
He's just kind of throwing words at a wall, yeah. And I kind of like I sort of thought at this point, it just want to remind like the Red Pill guys that you can be a stay-at-home mom and a feminist. Like
you can.
It's not like a black and white world of like modern women and other. It's like they don't have to be like these uber traditional types. And there's also a joke here about feminists having purple hair and there being 3 million genders. It's lazy boomer humor. Like, we've had a chapter entirely sourced from another book. We've had some short made-up stories, and now boomer jokes about women that have been like done to death. It's like this is making me tired.
Well, this whole paragraph just didn't even make sense to me. Like, it sounded like, was he high when he wrote this? It's like, the new contract, he says, examples include feminists with purple hair, people that identify as one of the 3,976,243 genders, androgynous men who are open to open relationships, parents okay with outsourcing their children to the state, etc. And I'm like, what?
That's a book worth of discussion. Like, just those things as throwaway points. So you're meant to be like, yeah, and the welfare state, and like, what are we talking about? There's also a bit in here that is was really transphobic. It reminded me of the sort of the gender sort of disparity with like accepting gay couples and stuff. And I kind of was like, yeah, Red Pill is pretty much always transphobic because it relies so heavily on outdated gender norms. Like, it has to say that trans people are wrong or silly or some sort of conspiracy, because otherwise all their like weirdly black and white strict gender stuff doesn't work.
The last paragraph of this page, I was wondering, like, what is Myrons Goal with this? This is where I started to get confused. He's like, as women are confused today about their role in modern society, so are men. This is because the biological nature of the old contract runs contrary to the statutory nature of the new contract. For example, men pursue the opposite sex traditionally, which is encouraged under the old contract, but such actions are frowned upon, discouraged, or even outright punished under the new contract. So I'm over here like, what is his ideal goal? Does he want women to go to work? Because he keeps talking about women not working as like if it's a point against women. Like, women aren't working, they're not bringing in any money, you as the man have the whole burden. But then he's also talking about, well, women aren't supposed to work because they're not as good at it, they should just be providing sex for you. And I'm like, which is your goal? Is it bad if women work? Are women lazy if they don't go to work? Or are they rebuking their biological nature if they do go to work? Like, what is your end goal? That's why I'm like, this is a grift.
What I think it is, and this, he obviously talks about this again, because I think this is in my notes somewhere later on, but he basically, it's this kind of like cheap end game, I think, with the Red Pill kind of grift, where it just sort of blames women for everything. It finds a way to blame women for everything, even if that's just how women are supposed to be. It's like, well, women are going to college and getting jobs, so they don't need men anymore, but also they're financially taking advantage of men. And you're like, well, what's the right way? What is the way that you want? Or is it just that both ways are wrong because you need to blame women?
If we go to page 19, he explains that the welfare state is the fault of capitalism.
There is one bit, I will say, in chapter 3 where he goes on to say something along the lines of women shouldn't be viewed as evil for wanting a man who's financially stable, which I actually agree with, and is something I've tried to point out before. It doesn't mention any of the reasons for that, like the historic oppression of women, the fact that women couldn't work, so they had to be financially reliant on men, or women were then paid less. But at least when it asks, this is what the book asks, is she a whore for demanding a man make money? He says, not really. So,
yeah,
hooray. This is one of my other favorite quotes from the book. This chapter ends by telling the reader not to give up like a pussy. And pussy is capitalized.
This does not mean to give up like a pussy. I feel motivated.
That's fucking motivational shit. I want that on a mug. Like, that's great. And it does also say, there's like tiny bits of sort of common sense stuff that I agree with sprinkled throughout. And it does say, in between bits about how modern women have ruined their lives or whatever, it says not to deny your human nature and strike a a balance between reality and your desires. And I think on its own, removed from the context of whatever this book is trying to be, that's kind of useful advice.
When we get into chapter 4, he has this quote on page 18. So, for nearly all their existence, women needed men. While men could carve their existence out of the real world through their actions, women could not, making them wholly dependent on men. Consequently, women had to find a man and keep him happy. They had to dote on men, cook for men, have sex with men, even if they didn't want to, and take care of men. All this lest they cared to die. Wait, are you presenting this as a good thing? Because he's basically saying here that, like, assault is a good thing. He's like, women used to have sex with men, even if they didn't want to. They still had to do it. And I'm like, but that's bad.
He never like fully commits to saying whether that's good or bad. And
Right.
I almost wonder if that's just so he doesn't offend the men in his audience that think that like assault is okay. It's very bizarre.
It's
and there's
weird.
also like there's all this stuff at the start. He complains about like pop music having anti-male propaganda. Because women sing about not needing a man. And I'm just like, this happens a few times where it's like, but what about all the history of like songs that men have sung? This is the main takeaway that I had of this book as a whole, is like the audience that it talks to, that this male audience, it treats men, or at least the men that are supposed to be reading this book, as like really fragile, kind of pathetic, like
Yep.
sex addicted, sex obsessed, kind of shallow, stupid men spending all their money trying to impress women. And it's just like, can you read this and not be offended as like a man? Like, it's so, oh my god. So they do this bit as well when they're talking about Myron, when he's talking about the new contract, and he translates from womanese to English. And the translation is, I don't need you anymore. And consequently, we need to rearrange how men and women interact with one another in society. I need you to recognize that I'm no longer dependent on you, and both our behaviors need to reflect that. And I was like, that's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They'll live their lives without being forced into marriage, without being financially dependent on men. They're no longer beholden in those ways to men who would treat them badly. Like, the book frames that as a bad thing.
Right,
Like,
relationships work best when nobody needs
just
each other.
it.
Yeah. Like, if you're reliant on each other for your survival, that relationship is going to be there's going to be more risk involved in it, because if something goes wrong in the relationship, if something turns abusive, or if some certain set of circumstances come up that make the relationship difficult, you're not going to be able to leave the relationship. You're going to be together because you have to be, instead of actually working on it because it's something you actually want. He has this whole section called Capitalism. Coinciding with the Industrial Revolution was a revolution of free markets, or capitalism. Capitalism lets people keep most of the fruits of their labor and limits government. So he gives like a basic thing about a bunch of billionaires, big entrepreneurs who made, the Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, those type of people. He says, these economic policies, timed with the Industrial Revolution, resulted in incredible economic growth that birthed the First World, but it also made countries so incredibly rich that they had more money than mere food, clothing, and shelter required. Coincidentally, these capitalist economies also happen to be democracies where the people determine government policy. Over time, nearly every First World capitalist nation voted for generous and well-funded welfare states. If the Industrial Revolution didn't tear up the old contract, the welfare state certainly did. And I was like, wait, you were just talking about how capitalism is a free market where people trade goods and services for the prices that they want to without government intervention. But now you're saying that the welfare state, which is government intervention, is the problem. So how did capitalism cause this?
It's bizarre. I think this came up the last time we reviewed something together. I just think for me, it was when we were reviewing that Trump like romance book. It's like for me, I don't know enough about politics to write a throwaway paragraph with details about politics in like political systems. That I wouldn't write it, because it just kind of sounds like he doesn't really understand capitalism, or he doesn't really get what he's talking about. Like, I didn't learn anything from this section, because
I didn't either. I didn't even understand
about like this.
I didn't understand what he was trying to convey to me.
Then we get a list of facts, which I bitterly had to do my own research because the citations here are so poor or lacking. I had to do my own research in order to debunk.
Are you talking about the dystopian nightmare section?
The dystopian nightmare section.
Yeah, okay.
So he doesn't include like any context. You kind of have to either do the work as the reader or assume he's correct and just be fed some bullshit. And the major thing, again, I think he's writing to a narrow audience, so he probably didn't think he needed to say it. But for me as an English person, I very quickly discovered that this is US specific, and I kind of wish that it had said that. First one is marriage is at an all-time low of 5.1 marriages per 100 people. While this is technically correct, this specifically refers to the number of marriage contracts completed in 2020 during COVID with the lockdown.
Oh, yeah, everyone put their wedding on hold.
He knew that when he chose to include that. He's not blind to... He doesn't mention COVID at all in this book, which I think there's a lot of crossover between Red Pill and sort of conspiracy stuff, so I wonder if that's why. Again, not wanting to offend an audience that doesn't believe in COVID, or I don't know, but it makes a lot of these statistics quite misleading. The 45% divorce rate one is, again, technically correct. This changing relationship between men and women is supposed to be like a brand new thing, but in the 80s the divorce rate was 50%. And divorce
so
rates,
it's lower now.
So it's lower now, and divorce rates in the USA are significantly higher than the rest of the world. Don't know why, but that's interesting. And then we get 70 to 80% of divorces are initiated by women, jumping to 90% if the woman is college educated. So I found this hard to look up because all of the sources that cite studies refer to the same one study. And in that study, 69% of women petitioned for divorce. Apparently more studies put the figure between like 60 and 70%, which is still the majority, but also I found that interestingly, outside of marriage, men and women are statistically equally likely to initiate a breakup. So that one wasn't like too far off, just a bit lazy.
Even if he has an audience that has like anti-vaxxers and stuff in it, regardless of what you believe on the science of the disease, the
Lockdown
fact
was
that
a real
it
thing.
changed, we all were given these lockdown orders. People virtually went on dates or like just texted over an app instead of meeting up in person. So
Yeah.
well, now that's making me wonder, okay, so do these Tinder studies he shows where he's like, people will talk on the app but not actually go on the dates, were those from during COVID times too? Because I'm like, a lot of people probably talk to each other digitally, but didn't want to meet in person because they were worried about spreading COVID.
Because that's, again, knowing that he wrote it during COVID and during the pandemic and was doing his research at that time, really, when you realize how skewed some of these things are because of COVID and the lockdowns, it's like, well, how much of this do we believe at all? The family formation, quote, the 3.6 births per woman in 1960 to 1.64 in 2020. That's true. I'll get the article in the description because it was quite interesting, I thought, that talked about these states. A significant portion of that reduction was a reduction in teen births. Some of the decline is linked to a decline in unintended births. So the article goes on to talk about like historic fertility declines and completely unpredictable booms, and sort of argues that a decline isn't a net negative. Like a lot of the time it's a good thing. It's better protection for like children. And, you know, I thought the next fact was funny. I couldn't debunk that because I didn't know. It says premarital activities such as courtship, dating, and sex are down as well. I had no idea how to research that. Like how do you define premarital activities? Like, what do you compare it to? Who's registering how many dates they're having?
Oh, I love this one. Women flake on dates at least 56% of the time, but field reports from men in the red pill community put it closer to 70%. And I'm like, I love how you didn't cite any. They just
more than normal men.
And I have special insider information that says it's this much. I'm not going to tell you where it is. It's just, I have it.
He even, like, he's doing red pill men a disservice here because he's specifically saying red pill field reports put it higher. So it basically is saying red pill men get ditched more often. Also, okay, this one annoyed me because I looked it up, right? I went to the source that he himself listed, and it says 56% of men and women were ghosted. It's not 56% of women were ghosting men all the time. It was both. Men were doing it too. That wasn't even the original source. He was too lazy to follow the link from the blog he got it from to the actual, like, survey. So I'm just like, even just to sound better in his book, it was, so it was a survey conducted in 2018 by a different blog website that polled 1,852 people in the US. And I just wanted to remind you that the guy, Myron, opened this part of the book with, you know, I love stats. He does this thing, it's like, where he does this sort of contradictory thing again, where he has this bit where he says, he's talking about hashtags like kill all men and stuff like that. And he says it might be like relegated to small misandrous sections of the internet, but they have a disproportionate effect on men's morale. And that's so fascinating to me, because he's just said this stuff about like women complaining about harassment and sexism and stuff is nonsense that we should ignore. Like, he can accept that a small group of women being hateful towards men can affect men's morale, but women can't and shouldn't be affected by like mainstream sexism and harassment from men. It's like it basically again just sort of frames men as like so fragile and like easy to hurt, but women as just like water off a duck's back, mate. Like, we shouldn't complain because it's whatever. It's just really bizarre.
I highlighted this quote on page 24 where he's basically talking about how, like, men, we gave you everything, women. We gave you everything you could ever want, and you're still not grateful. It's just, this is so funny, though. We gave women absolutely everything they wanted. We gave them rights, independence, a welfare state, birth control, reproductive rights, affirmative action, heavily subsidized college educations, nursing stations, maternal leave, paternal leave, sensitive soy boys like Hassan Abi. There's just so much to unpack in this, but when he talks about we gave women everything they wanted, I'm like, what do you mean you gave it to women? Are you saying that you have the rights to give it and take it away? Like, that's my thing, is like, if you're in a position where you feel that you gave women everything they wanted, that's inherently contradictory, because what women want is not to be in a position where men can give and take away rights from them.
It's like a classic boomer red pill thing again, where it's just like, you got the right to vote, what do you have to complain about now? Whenever women point out inequality, it's like, just shut up, grandpa. Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff, when he kind of like just repeats stuff for no sort of reason, a bit like the children thing, like the you don't have to have children thing, the fat phobia thing, I feel like either like he has some sort of personal, it just screams to me like personal issues projected onto all men. Like, either he's like secretly fetishizing something, or he's got like a personal weight issue, or, you know, like there's something, because it doesn't make sense. It's just like a weird additional throwaway thing in the book that doesn't need to be there. And you're like, why has he written this? I fully think like he's projecting a lot of personal issues in this.
I also think just randomly throwing Hassan in there is funny too, because that feels like a personal thing. Like, does Myron have some beef with him or something? Because I always thought Hassan has a pretty strong male fan base. Like, what do you mean you gave him to women? He has a lot of male fans. And I think Twitch is like a mostly male platform. He has a lot of male fans. He is not a sensitive sort. Like, do you just have beef with him in particular? Because that's so weird and nonsensical to throw that in there. Everybody, we are gonna do part 2 of this on Emma's channel. If you're watching this when it first releases, it will be on her channel tomorrow. And if you're watching this after the first day it releases, it's already there. I will link Emma's channel in the description below. Go ahead over there to listen to part 2 as we continue to unpack all the dumb shit in this book. See you there!
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.